At the end of King Solomon's reign over Israel, God told a man named Jeroboam that he would become king over all but one of the tribes of Israel. But Solomon wasn't ready to give up the throne, so he tried to kill Jeroboam, who escaped and fled to Egypt. A short while later, Solomon died, and his son Rehoboam was named king. The people were unhappy with the heavy taxes placed on them and went to complain, along with their spokesperson, Jeroboam. Despite their complaints, the king refused to listen. Furious, most of Israel made Jeroboam their leader and lived in the northern territory called Israel, where Rehoboam ruled over the southern tribe called Judah. After being a united country for many years, Israel was now split in two. The new king of the northern territory, Jeroboam, was worried that when his people returned to the south in order to worship at the temple in Jerusalem, they might be persuaded to become loyal to Rehoboam instead of him. So he devised a plan. He constructed 2 golden calves and told his people that they were the gods that helped them escape from Egypt many years earlier. Then he had a huge festival to worship these gods, and unbelievably, the Israelites went along with it. Then one day, Jeroboam was at one of the altars making a sacrifice, when a man who followed God approached Jeroboam and warned him that his kingdom would soon be ruined. Jeroboam stretched out his arm and shouted, "Seize him!" As he did, his hand shriveled up. Terrified, Jeroboam pleaded with the man to pray for him. So the man prayed for Jeroboam's hand, and it was healed. Even after this display of God's power, Jeroboam still led the people to worship other gods. For years, Jeroboam and Rehoboam were at war. When Rehoboam died, his son and then grandson took over as kings of Judah. His son worshipped other gods just like his father. But Rehoboam's grandson, Asa, was different. Asa got rid of the idols and was fully committed to following God. The northern kingdom of Israel continued to be led by a series of wicked men, none of whom followed God. One of these kings was Ahab, who did more evil in the eyes of God than any king before him. Perhaps worst of all, Ahab married Jezebel, a woman from a foreign country who convinced him and almost all of Israel to worship a foreign god named Baal. Because of this, God would need to send a messenger to set things straight.
Any questions on that? Any impression on that? Anybody have any thoughts on that story?
I was just myself, I was thinking, it seemed to me back in those days that there was a lot of competition with God.
Competition with God.
With idols and people thinking, where, I think that there's things that come in Thailand, which try to think it's a little different today. It's a little more complex.
That's interesting. So I think it appears there was a lot of competition with God, if you didn't hear what Danny said, for God. I think they lived in a time when this tribe had their God, and this tribe had their God, and their name was, and this tribe had their God, and their name was. Today, we come from a country and kind of a Western world where we've had a God, and that's been the God. But there are other things we put our trust in. There are other gods, effectively, but we don't call them gods. But we trust in what else? Money, power, our intellect. We don't say they're gods, but they effectively are. Although I think that we are increasingly seeing that. We're seeing an emphasis on, or a growing competition from other religions. We have Allah. Islam is growing. And that is another, well, let's just say that that's another version of God. That is another God. There's just a difference between Allah and Yahweh. They would say they're the same. But we see people who just dismiss God entirely and put reason. We've seen the flying spaghetti monster. Anybody seen the flying spaghetti monster? There's been it's a in-your-face making fun of our Christian beliefs in God. But there are other people who are truly putting up scientific reason really as an alternative to God. So that's an interesting perspective you have there. There seems to be a lot of competition for God. There is today too, but we just don't kind of use the same.
It grabs me that there was a time that the Lord came before man, and they felt it in song where today we don't have that advantage. You know, we read about it, listen to it, without the presence of the kind of physical form that they had.
Yeah, they had a much more personal, well, yeah, let's talk more about that. I think
Where today, our faith, we don't have that piece of the puzzle to give us the confidence. And with that, they had it, and how could they lose it and be tempted when it was there?
Great question. It's been, how long has it been since God has made a dramatic presence? It's been 2,000 years of clearly God with us. Yeah. Well, good point. So we continue with this story of God's people, and if we go back to Abraham, God came to Abraham and he said, I will make you the father of a great people. And he sowed the seeds of this vast nation of people. And then 500 years later, he came to Moses and he said, take my people out of Egypt and set them up in a new country, and that country will be a beacon of light to the rest of the world of what it means to live in relationship to me. So Moses did that. And then 400 years after that, he came to Samuel and Samuel said, hey, they want a king. And God said, okay, give them a king. And Samuel set them up with a series of kings after that. 100 years after that, David came. And God said, I will bless you and bless your country. And about 30 years after that, Solomon came with all this wisdom and all this money and all this healthy country. And 30 years after that, it was a mess. Solomon just really left for his son a country that collapsed. It fell apart terribly. And it fell apart so badly that of the next 38 kings after Solomon, 35 of them were noted for how they did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Very few of the kings did good in the eyes of the Lord. So here's this prosperous country built for generations and generations by the work of God and his people, and they finally come to a place where they have a country and they are healthy and wealthy and well thought of, and it just is in such a short period of time that the whole thing fell apart. The whole people began to worship these other gods, to turn their back on Yahweh, and these great plans go awry. Well, why is that? Why does God's work over all these years result in the thing falling apart? This is God's country. This is God's plan. And it fell apart. How does that happen? Do you remember a few years ago, the Costa Concordia? Costa Concordia was a huge passenger ship. If you remember this, it was it burned into our brains a bit. It left the port of Rome for a tour of the Mediterranean, and it was white and glistening and beautiful and full of 4,200 passengers. And within a couple of days, in fact, it was 6 years ago today, it hit the rocks and turned over on its side and sat there and began to rot in the ocean. And it took 32 people with it. Now, when they left, it looked great. all the gleaming metal and the polished brass and the newest technology, but it left with problems. There was a culture on this ship that doomed it. The crew was not prepared for emergencies. The captain, if you remember, the captain said, well, the ship turned over and it threw me into a lifeboat, and the lifeboat left and I ended up on shore. Yeah, I mean, by the way, he's in jail for 16 years because of that. But he abandoned ship and jumped into a life ship. Passengers didn't know where to go to safety. Nobody was leading them. And the watertight doors had not even been checked. It turned out they leaked, and it was just a mess. See, that ship was fine until it wasn't. It didn't have problems until the problems came, and they were problems too big for them to solve. We see that same thing happen with Israel. Solomon hands his son a kingdom that looks like it's in good shape. Money and power and prestige, beautiful buildings and lots of leaders running around doing things. They seem to be off to a good start, but very quickly the problems happen and the thing degenerates and it breaks into two different countries. But that didn't just happen. Those seeds had been planted long before, and they had just germinated under Solomon, under Jeroboam, when Solomon passed the country on. Why did that happen? Why did God's country, why did God's plan, God's Israel, why did his plan fall apart so badly? Well, maybe it was just a bad plan. I mean, God's plan was, we read in Deuteronomy, the Lord your God, keeping his covenant of love to 1,000 generations of those who love him and keep his commandments. So God's plan was, set aside a bunch of people, tell them to follow my commandments, follow my ways, and I will love them and make them prosper. But is that really realistic for 1,000 generations? Is that realistic for a bunch of sinful people? Because it didn't appear to work too well, did it? Was it a mistake? Was it an impractical plan? But then I get to something you kind of began to touch on, Danny. Do you know the story of God in the world? Do you care about it? Do you know that you are part of his family? Do you know that he is faithful to you? You do. I mean, that's why you're here this morning. So God's plan, as maybe apparently messed up as it appears to maybe be, it's still working. Because you know about it. So somehow through all that brokenness, it is working. So the plan is not necessarily an impractical plan. So what's going on here? The country falls apart. The plan's not bad. There's something else going on. Maybe it's a little bit too complicated a plan. I mean, it is pretty complicated. God says, here are my commandments. Here's my way. This is what it means to be in relationship with me. But what do we do when we are given rules or ways things are supposed to be and people don't follow them? We create rules, don't we? You're supposed to be a decent person. We're called to be a decent person. And we have this new thing today called bullying. It used to be just being mean, being a kind of a jerk. Today we have bullying. If you are caught bullying in the workplace or at school, what happens? Man, you're slammed. There are rules against bullying. What happens if you say things that hurt other people? Things that might be racist or sexist or you are going to suffer for that, even if you didn't even mean it. There are rules about how we are to behave. There are things that are going to force us, channel us to be good and decent people, whatever that means by the people that are making these rules. We come up with all kinds of rules about how the world is supposed to work. We do that in churches too. the way the church is supposed to work, what we're supposed to do or not do, talk about, not talk about. We can come up with a million rules that force us to be a certain way. What did Jesus call people who followed all those rules? Remember? There was a whole class of people.
Boring.
What's that?
Boring.
Boring. I don't know if they were boring. They were, who's that? The Pharisees. They were the Pharisees, the people who followed all the rules. Pharisees. Did Jesus like Pharisees? Heck no. He said they're like whitewashed tombs. They look really good on the outside, like that ship, all polished, white, shiny. But on the inside, he called them tombs. They were dead. They followed the rules, but they were dead. See, the plan is not to have a million rules we have to follow. The plan was really simple. When they said, Jesus, what is the plan? What are we supposed to do? He said, love God and your neighbor as yourself. It's that simple. God's plan is that simple. It's not complicated. So it's not a broken plan. It's not a complicated plan. But it still didn't work. Why didn't it work? What is going on with this country falling apart the way it has? It's not working. Well, perhaps it has more to do with how they're carrying out the plan, and whether it's a good plan or a complicated plan. So Solomon, inspired by God, talked to by God, it speaks to God and is filled with God's wisdom, isn't he? Rehoboam, his son, consulted who? His friends. He consulted wise people, and they said, hey, lighten up on these people, you're taxing them too hard. He thought, I'll think about that. Then he went out and talked to his hipster friends. He said, what should we be doing, man? How do we handle these people? And they said, scourge them with scorpions. He said, yeah, that sounds good. We'll do that. And it didn't work so well. Solomon filled himself with God's wisdom, Rehoboam with the wisdom of his buddies, and the kingdom was destroyed. What can we learn here? We will be filled with wisdom. We will be filled with wisdom. It'll be from God. It'll be from our friends. It'll be from ourselves. Something will fill us. And the wisdom we are filled with will have consequences for us. When they did a study on why this ship sunk, why the Costa Concordia sunk, they were appalled at the culture that existed on this ship. It was not the culture that that traditionally operated on vessels for centuries, about taking care of the passengers and being prepared. It was none of that. The culture on that ship worked fine until there was a problem, but the culture was not wise. They adopted their own wisdom. And the people of Israel did the same thing. They became overconfident in themselves. And they married too many wives. They collected too many taxes. They dismissed too many people's pleas for help. And then Solomon passed that on to his son with that same lack of wisdom, and the kingdom sank. How's your wisdom? How do you get filled with wisdom? Do you come on Sunday and hear all this good, godly wisdom and go out with the tools of the ancient mariners and then go into your world and hear all the other stuff and start sailing? Yeah, kind of like that, but kind of like that too. And merge them together. See, we are so tempted to listen to the wisdom of the world because it's so prevalent. And it sounds so good. It captures us. And then when we get pushed into a corner, when we hit the rocks, we get our hole ripped open. God's wisdom is not always what's obvious. God's wisdom is not always what we see or the way we would do it. But God's wisdom does keep us from getting broken into and ripped open by the rocks beneath us. And so what happens when we go into Monday with a lot of that godly wisdom and then our own wisdom, and we get wrecked? What happens? You know what they do with the Costa Concordia? They raise it back up. You know what it costs to raise it back up and drag it to a dive right up? $2 billion. That was an expensive mistake. $2 billion. They took that ship, they drug it back into the dry dock, and they totaled it. And they cut it up for scrap. And they melted it down, and they made new ships out of it. See, most of the world, when they take the wisdom of the world and they crash themselves and they sink, they will just die. But Christians are given a little bit different option here. We too will crash. We too will sink. But our Lord lifts us up and drags us over to the dry dock. And it may be painful, but he melts us down. And he says, you know what? We're going to make a new ship out of you. And that new ship is going to have a chance to sail as well. And I will be your wisdom on that ship if you want me. I will be with you in your sails, in rough seas and calm. Because I value you enough to keep you from sitting at the bottom of the ocean. We can listen to the wisdom of the world. We can listen to the wisdom of our Lord. We can try to figure out bits and pieces of each. But if we crash, we are either dead or we are alive in him and reformed. And we listen to the wisdom of him who comes to us and him who loves us. He takes us up, melts us down, and reforms us and stays with us. If Israel had done that, they wouldn't have had the mess they had and the mess we're going to begin to hear more about. But they didn't. We can. May the wisdom of God be with you today. May you be blessed in what you hear and know are his words with you. And may you have the ability to hear the wisdom of the world and let the world have it. And hang on to those words of the Lord who loves you. In Jesus' name, amen.